Welcome back, everyone. Michael here with Offshore Citizen. Today I'm going to go through with you the difference between three potentially tax-free structures. There's a few others that are related to it, which is US LLCs, UK LLPs, and Canadian LPs. All right. We're going to talk about what the differences are, where one might benefit you, where one might not benefit you, and whether it's right for you. So let's dive in. All right. So if you're familiar, we've done some videos on this in the past. It is possible using a US LLC for a foreigner to end up in a very favorable situation where essentially it can act as a tax-free vehicle, okay? You can be in a situation where, because of the nature, it's a disregarded entity, or it can be treated as a disregarded entity for US tax purposes, not subject to US tax, and potentially that can open you up to an opportunity to, like I said, have a tax-free company. Now, here's the thing about that. If you flip it around, and you look at some other options, one of the common ones that you'll hear people talk about is a UK LLP, and you can also get a Canadian limited partnership. You could also get into Dutch structures. There's a variety of different ones, okay? The fundamental important point here is that this structure is not considered to be a legal taxable entity for the local income tax purposes, meaning that the owners of it, or the partners in this particular case, where we're talking partnerships, are taxable on their share of it, okay? So, meaning but they're only taxable because it's basically they have filed a personal tax return rather than a corporate tax return. They end up only taxable if there is domestic source income, okay? So, if, for example, I'm in Bulgaria right now, so we're in Bulgaria, a Bulgarian forms a Canadian limited partnership, an LP, and they don't have any Canadian source income going through there, then all the income through that vehicle could be tax-free for them from a Canadian standpoint, okay? And so a lot of people say, hey, great, I'm going to use a UK LLP, I'm going to use a Canadian LP, what's the deal here? Now, here's the thing, I'm going to introduce you to a really simple concept, but it's a really important concept, and this is what we call hybrid mismatch. Okay, so hybrid mismatch is something that the OECD talks about and has defined, and hybrid mismatch arrangements essentially are where when some sort of illegal structure is treated differently in one country than in another, and this can create a gap. So one of the big examples that I often use is the mismatching rules between Ireland and the US in terms of corporate residency. Ireland, for many, many years, they've kind of adjusted now, but they would use something, they would have what were called management control standards exclusively for the company, whereas in the US, they would use registration standards, and this would mean that companies like Apple would have an Irish registered company, which was managed and controlled in California. They would say to the US, well, this is not a US company because it's registered in Ireland. They would say to the Irish tax authorities, this is not a US company, it's not an Irish company because it's managed and controlled in the US, okay? So as a result, they claimed no tax residency anywhere, and as a result, got away without paying a lot of tax for a long period of time, all right? A lot of people who I talk to who don't really know what they're talking about, they'll say, oh yeah, Ireland, this place, if I was rich, I'd set up in Ireland. No, that's completely not the case, all right? Ireland's gonna be 12.5%, sometimes 25% tax, so, not necessarily that amazing. What was special about Ireland in that case was the corporate residency rules. There's a few other things as well, but the corporate residency rules, not the tax rate, okay? So that's really, really important as a distinction to understand. So we have something very similar with a US LLC that we tend not to have with a UK LLP or a Canadian LP, all right? Which is why, generally speaking, we usually don't set up for people UK LLPs or Canadian LPs. There are places and points in time where this can be useful. It can be perfectly good in terms of if you need to access infrastructure there, maybe you actually are doing some investing there, et cetera, et cetera. There are purposes for these structures, of course. But it tends to be, in certain cases anyway, quite different than a US LLC. And the reason for this is that most of the world has partnerships. Okay, almost the vast majority of countries in the world have some legal form which represents a partnership, meaning it's a flow-through entity with multiple partners. These are the normal corporate forms, right? You normally have a sole trader, you have a partnership, you have a corporation. sometimes we've got a video on this, joint stock corporation, etc. Okay. In the US, they have this bizarre thing, which is not a partnership, it's an LLC. And the question then becomes, well, how does a foreign country treat an LLC? And in some cases, this is very clear, okay? For example, in Canada, they treat a US LLC as a corporation. This is extremely useful, right? Because really the tax treatment is like a limited partnership or partnership in the US. But from the Canadian standpoint, it's a corporation. And this creates this hybrid mismatch. So you can take advantage of that, provided that the substance behind the structure is good, okay? On the flip side, Australia does the opposite, right? Australia treats a US LLC as a partnership, and it's a flow-through income, so it doesn't gain you anything in and of itself, all right? Let's contrast it, and so a lot of countries just have no statement on this. So generally speaking, you can often get away with treating a US LLC as a corporation for your local tax purposes, and therefore you can defer income, and you can often take the income out, treating it as a dividend, okay? Now, at some point in time, that may change, that local tax authorities in a particular place may crack down on it, etc., but it is a big potential loophole for the right people. The problem is, when the country has partnership rules, then generally they're going to treat partnership income as partnership income. And I give you a really specific example, okay? Let's look at somebody who decides to move to Portugal, and they're taking advantage of the non-habitual residency regime, okay? With the non-habitual residency program, you can receive various forms of foreign source income, which tends to include dividends, tax-free, okay? Now, the problem is there's this blacklist, okay? So, okay, you have this blacklist, that's going to cause you some issues. So you say, okay, well, what's a country that's not blacklisted that we could go and we could have the income earned there, and then, you know, the dividends could be received potentially tax-free, okay? Well, Canada would be a good example of that, right? So you can say, okay, great. Well, the problem is I'm going to pay Canadian corporate tax, and normally if I pay a dividend out, then I'm going to also pay withholding tax. So what if I didn't have a corporation in Canada? Instead, I had a Canadian limited partnership, okay? Then because there's no Canadian source income, I don't pay Canadian tax, and when I pay it out, there's no withholding tax in this particular case, assuming, depending on the structure of what's going on, the types of income, etc., but bring it in, there's no withholding tax, okay, great. Now, how does that get treated in Portugal? Well, the problem is, Portugal doesn't treat it as dividend income, they treat it as partnership income, and therefore you're going to likely end up being subject to tax. Okay, so you don't gain that same benefit. Whereas if I was to do a similar thing in the US, right, I say, okay, well, now how does Portugal treat a US LLC? And typically, again, they haven't reviewed it, it's not in enough detail, etc., and you can take advantage of these mismatches. So this is a really important distinction. A lot of people don't seem to understand this concept of an LLC and why an LLC can be so useful as compared to these other structures. Again, these other structures can be used, right? There are various reasons why I'm doing a structure right now, and we're using a limited partnership structure, and there's some reasons for that, right? But in terms of being able to take advantage of the deferral and then effectively having dividends, even though it wasn't treated as dividends in the origin side, you can't do that in many, many of these cases, okay? So bottom line is there's lots of places where you can use partnerships. Partnerships can be perfectly valuable to you. They can be something that you may want to look at, and reach out to us if you have a question, and also subscribe to the videos while you're at it, because you may get some information along the way. We have a video specifically on the different corporate forms, and you can go and check that out if you're having difficulty following along. But you're probably not going to have the same ability to do like hybrid mismatch and take advantage of that. By the way, there are rules against hybrid mismatches in certain cases, so be aware of that too. Anyway, I'm sharing this with you to give an insight that most people don't seem to really understand, but can make a big difference in your tax treatment. I hear a lot of people who say, oh, I'm going to set up a UK LLP. Oh, it doesn't pay any tax. It's like, yeah, but it's flow-through income, and it's probably treated as partnership in your country. And actually, partnership income can be taxable at a higher rate than dividend income, and therefore you may actually be screwing yourself up compared to another option. So anyway, that's the summary here. If you like the video, please like the video, actually check it off as liking it, subscribe, click the little bell to get notified. If you have some sort of question, if you're wondering about what other countries might have some of these rules, etc., then make a comment below. Also, if you want to see other content, please let me know. And I'm going to look forward to seeing you guys on the next video.